Your manifestation is working right now, in this exact moment where everything looks like it's stopped. That stall you're feeling, that silence where you expected movement, has a name and a mechanics behind it. You've been interpreting the pause as proof that nothing is happening. By the end of this, you'll understand why the pause is the happening, and why walking away during it is the single most costly mistake you can make. The Hermetic Law of Rhythm, one of the 7 universal principles outlined in the Kybalion, states that everything flows in and out. Everything has its tides, its advance and retreat. A pendulum swings to the right, and it must swing to the left. This principle operates across every layer of existence: seasons, economies, emotions, civilizations. And it operates in your manifestation with the same certainty. When you first hold a new assumption about yourself, there's a surge. You feel it in your chest. The world seems to rearrange itself almost immediately. Synchronicities appear, old patterns crack open, people respond to you differently. That's the pendulum swinging forward. And because it feels so alive, so confirming, you assume the trajectory is a straight line upward. You start counting on the momentum, then the swing reverses, the text you expected go quiet. The opportunity stalls. The old doubts creep back in at 3 a.m, whispering that you were foolish to believe any of this could change. Your body tightens, your breath gets shallow, and in that contraction, something dangerous happens. You start interpreting rhythm as rejection. You read the natural retreat of the pendulum as evidence that your assumption failed, that you did it wrong, that the universe said no. It said nothing of the sort. The pendulum has to swing back. The Kybalion is explicit about this. The law is inescapable. Every forward movement generates its corresponding retreat. The question was never whether the pullback would come. The question is what you do inside it. Neville Goddard taught that persistence in assumption is the key to all transformation. He described a state he called living in the end, occupying the feeling of the wish fulfilled so completely that external contradiction loses its authority over your inner state. Most people understand this during the forward swing. When reality cooperates, living in the end feels natural, easy even. The real test arrives during the retreat. Picture the last time you held a strong intention and everything went quiet. Remember that specific texture of doubt, the way it crawled in through the gap between what you assumed and what you saw. Your old story had a voice, and during the backward swing, that voice gets louder. Every piece of contradictory evidence feels amplified. A friend's offhand comment lands like a verdict. A delayed email becomes a closed door. You start building a case against your own desire, and you don't even realize you're doing it. This is the mechanism that destroys most manifestations. The person holds the assumption beautifully through the advance, then abandons it the moment rhythm pulls the pendulum back. They quit at the exact point where their persistence would have mattered most. The backward swing is where assumptions are forged or broken. Everything before it was rehearsal. Think about what happens physically when a pendulum reaches the far point of its backward arc. There's a moment of perfect stillness, zero motion. If you froze the frame right there, you'd swear the pendulum had stopped forever. But that stillness contains all the energy of the next forward swing, compressed into a single point. The stillness is loaded. It's a coiled spring, and the only thing that can prevent it from releasing is if someone reaches in and stops the pendulum by hand. That's what abandoning your assumption does. You reach in and grab the pendulum at the moment of greatest stored potential. You stop the very mechanism that was about to carry your manifestation forward. The Kybalion describes a practice the Hermetic masters used, a mental technique of polarization. When the backward swing arrived, they didn't resist it. They didn't pretend it wasn't happening. They rose above it by refusing to participate in the emotional content of the retreat. They observed the swing without swinging with it. Neville called this Sabbath, the rest after the creative act, the willingness to be still while the unseen rearranges itself into the seen. There's a crucial difference between patience and passivity here, and getting it wrong is where most seekers stumble. Passivity says, "I'll just wait and see what happens." That's doubt wearing a polite mask. Patience rooted in the law says, "The rhythm is doing exactly what rhythm does. My assumption is alive in the silence. I continue to occupy the end." One is resignation, the other is conscious participation in a law you understand. Your mental diet during the backward swing matters more than any meditation, any technique, any visualization you've ever practiced. Every thought you entertain during the retreat is either feeding your assumption or dismantling it. When you catch yourself rehearsing the old story, "It's been too long. Maybe I was wrong. Other people can do this, but I can't," you're actively using the backward swing's energy against yourself. You're taking the natural retreat and turning it into a reversal. The discipline required here is genuine. Nobody talks about how hard it is to maintain an inner conviction when every external signal contradicts it. Your five senses become prosecution witnesses, presenting evidence that your desire hasn't materialized, and the temptation is to listen to them because they feel so concrete, so reasonable. The chair you're sitting in is real. The bank account number is real. The empty inbox is real. How do you argue with what's tangible? You argue with what you know about rhythm. The winter doesn't disprove summer. It precedes it. The low tide doesn't mean the ocean is emptying. The contraction of your lungs between breaths doesn't mean you've stopped breathing. You know these things intellectually. The work, the real inner work, is knowing them in the middle of the night when your assumption feels like a fantasy, and the old reality feels like the only truth that exists. Some people need to hear this. The intensity of the backward swing is often proportional to the size of what's coming. A small desire creates a small pendulum arc. A life-altering assumption, a complete reimagining of who you are and what you deserve, creates a massive swing. So the bigger the doubt, the deeper the silence, the more crushing the apparent evidence against you, the larger the forward momentum that's being stored. The retreat that makes you want to quit is the same retreat that's loading the spring for the breakthrough you asked for. Goddard told a story about a man who held an assumption for weeks with total conviction, then gave up 3 days before the physical evidence arrived. 3 days. The entire inner architecture was built, the bridge of incidents was nearly complete. And he dismantled it because the backward swing felt too real, too heavy, too convincing. The rhythm was doing its work. He just couldn't see it from inside the retreat. So what does mastery of this law look like in practice? It looks boring. It looks like Tuesday morning, when nothing has changed in your external world, and you choose your assumption anyway. It looks like catching a spiral of doubt mid-thought, and gently, without force, without desperation, returning to the feeling of the wish fulfilled. It looks like going to bed in the state you've chosen, even when the day offered you 100 reasons to choose differently. No fireworks, no dramatic moments of willpower, just the quiet, repeated act of staying on the pendulum instead of jumping off. The rhythm will test you more than once. Each cycle tends to get shorter and less intense as your assumption solidifies, but the first major backward swing is where most people break. If you can hold through that one, genuinely hold in your feeling and your inner conversation through the fullness of the retreat, you'll discover something that changes your relationship with manifestation permanently. The swing back feels different when you understand it. The doubt loses its teeth. You can feel the pull of the old story without being dragged by it. You become, as the Kabbalion describes, someone who is swung by the law on a higher plane while refusing to be swung on the lower. Your manifestation has its own tide. Right now, wherever you are in the cycle, the surge or the silence, the law is operating with absolute precision. The silence asks one thing of you: stay. The backward swing has one question embedded in it, and it asks that question with every doubt, every delay, every piece of contradictory evidence it throws at your feet. Do you live in the end only when the end seems close? Or do you live there because it's who you've decided to be? The pendulum is swinging. It was always going to swing back before it swings forward again. Your only job is to still be standing in your assumption when it does.